The sun hung low over Brimstone Junction like a dying ember, casting long shadows across the cracked asphalt of Route 47. Dust devils swirled lazily in the heat, carrying the faint tang of sagebrush and engine oil. Inside Hayes Auto Repair, the air was thick with the metallic bite of welding sparks and the low hum of a cooling radiator. Gabriel Switch Hayes wiped grease from his calloused hands on a rag that had seen better days, his broad shoulders hunched under the weight of another solitary afternoon. At 49, Switch was a man built like the Harleys he fixed, solid, scarred, and unyielding. But the faded photo on the wall behind the counter, its edges curling from years of neglect, was the only softness in the place. It showed a woman with sun-kissed hair and a laugh that seemed to defy the desert's harshness. Naomi. Her name still echoed in his dreams, a ghost from a promise he'd buried deep. The bell above the door jingled sharply, cutting through the quiet like a knife. Switch glanced up, expecting another drifter looking for a quick patch job. Instead, a boy stood there no more than 12, clutching a half-empty soda can that sweated condensation onto the floor. His clothes were rumpled, too big for his skinny frame, and his eyes, wide and haunted, darted like a cornered animal's. Dirt streaked his cheeks, and his sneakers were caked with the red mud from the back roads. He trembled, not from the chill of the AC kicking in, but from something deeper, something that made Switch's gut twist instinctively. The boy froze, his gaze locking onto the photo. The soda can slipped from his fingers, fizzing forgotten on the concrete as it spilled a sticky trail. That's my mum," he whispered, his voice cracking like dry earth underfoot. The words hung in the air, heavy as the wrench in Switch's hand. He followed the boy's stare to Naomi's smiling face, the one captured on a forgotten summer day before everything shattered. Switch's knees buckled then, the world tilting as he gripped the counter to steady himself. No words came, just a collapse into the worn stool behind him, the stool creaking under his weight like an old confession. The boy, Eli Hart, though Switch wouldn't learn his name for another breathless minute, stepped forward, his small fists clenched. "She went away when I was little. They said she left on her own, but I know she didn't. I heard them talking about keeping me quiet." Switch's breath came in ragged pulls, the shop's fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like angry hornets. Memories flooded back unbidden. The night 20 years ago, under a monsoon sky that turned the desert to rivers of mud. His best friend Tommy lay dying in his arms after a botched run-in with a rival crew. Blood soaked Switch's jacket, warm and metallic, as Tommy's grip tightened on his arm. "Find her, Switch," he'd gasped, eyes glazing over. "Naomi, promise me she's family." Switch had nodded, the words sealing like solder on a cracked frame. But life had a way of rusting oaths, jail time, lost jobs, the endless grind of fixing what others broke. Naomi's case had gone cold, chalked up by the badges as voluntary disappearance. Switch had let it fade, or so he told himself, until this boy appeared like a thunderclap, pointing to the truth on his wall. Eli edged closer, his voice gaining a fragile edge of defiance. "I've been bounced around homes, different names, so no one asks questions. Last place the adults were whispering about some old picture, some guy who knew her. I stole a bus map and walked. Had to find out." The boy's eyes, so like Naomi's in their quiet fire, bored into Switch's. Outside, a semi rumbled past, its air brakes hissing like a warning. Switch rose slowly, his leather vest creaking, the patches of the Iron Promise MC, a faded eagle clutching a chain, catching the light. He wasn't just a mechanic. He was a brother in a brotherhood forged in fire, where promises weren't just words, but lifelines. Hawk Daniels, the club's iron-willed founder, had taught them that. Stand for the forgotten, or what's the point of the ride? But this was personal, a collision of past and present that threatened to upend everything. Switch's hand trembled as he touched the photo's frame, Naomi's smile now an accusation. "Kid," he said, his voice gravelly from disuse, You got a name? Eli straightened, chin lifting. Eli Hart, but they call me other things now. Switch nodded, the pieces slotting into place like gears in an old engine. Naomi Hart, yeah, that was her maiden name. The police reports he'd pored over in sleepless nights flickered in his mind. A woman vanishing from a quiet town, whispers of foul play dismissed as paranoia. And now her son, marked by the same shadows, standing in his shop like fate's cruel joke. The door swung open again, harder this time, and two figures stepped in. Local types, badges glinting under cheap jackets. Social services, probably, tracking runaways. "Eli Hart?" one barked, eyes narrowing at Switch. "You're coming with us, son. No more wandering." Eli shrank back, but Switch moved instinctively, placing himself between them like a shield. The air thickened, the scent of authorities' cologne clashing with the shop's honest grit. "He's not going anywhere till I hear the full story." Switch growled, his stance unyielding. The men exchanged glances, one reaching for a radio. Outside, the desert wind picked up, rattling the tin roof like distant thunder. In that moment, Switch felt the old promise stir, uncoiling from the grave he dug for it. Iron Promise wasn't about brawls or badges. It was about the quiet stand, the loyalty that outlasted rust. He'd call in favors. Hawk's network of eyes and ears, a PI who'd owed him since Nam days, maybe even that lawyer who handled the club's cleanups. But first, he had to believe. Eli's hand brushed his arm, small but steady. "Please," the boy said, "help me find what happened to her." Switch met his gaze, the weight of 20 years lifting just enough to breathe. This boy, this photo, it was the spark. The ride was starting, and for the first time in years, Switch felt the engine roar back to life. The sun dipped lower, painting the shop in crimson hues, as Switch locked the door behind the retreating officials. Eli slumped onto a stool, exhaustion etching lines on his young face. Switch poured him a fresh soda from the mini-fridge, the can hissing open like a sealed vow. "Tell me everything, kid, from the beginning." As Eli spoke, of foster homes that felt like cages, of overheard conversations laced with fear, Switch listened, the photo watching over them both. The desert night crept in, stars pricking the sky like distant witnesses. Redemption wasn't a grand explosion. It was this, a quiet ignition in the face of the dark. And Switch, for all his scars, was ready to burn. The desert night settled over Brimstone Junction like a heavy blanket, the kind that muffled sounds and amplified doubts. Inside Hayes Auto Repair, the single bulb above the workbench cast jagged shadows across tool benches, cluttered with wrenches and half-repaired carburetors. Eli Hart sat on the stool, his small hands wrapped around the cold soda can, condensation dripping like unshed tears onto the scarred wood. Switch leaned against the counter, arms crossed over his leather vest, the Iron Promise patch, a chained eagle in flight, staring back at him like a reminder of oaths long ignored. The boy's words spilled out in halting bursts, each one a pebble skipping across the still surface of Switch's resolve. "It started when I was 5, Eli began, his voice thin as the night air seeping through the cracks in the door. "Mom worked at the diner on the edge of town, the one with the neon sign that buzzed like a trapped fly. She smelled like coffee and vanilla, always humming these old songs while she braided my hair." He paused, staring at the fizzing bubbles in his drink, as if they held the fragments of those mornings. Outside, a coyote's distant yip pierced the quiet, echoing the loneliness in Eli's eyes. One night, she didn't come home. I waited by the window till dawn, pressing my face against the glass till it fogged up. The police came, asked questions, but they said she just left, packed a bag, and walked away from it all. From me. Switch's jaw tightened, the memory of his own losses clawing at the edges of his mind. He'd been there once, a kid himself, watching his father vanish into the bottle after a mill accident took his hands. But this was different, sharper, laced with the rot of something hidden. They ever look for her? Real looking, I mean? His voice was low, gravel grinding under tires. Eli shook his head, the motion pulling at the collar of his oversized shirt. Nah, said it was voluntary, whatever that means. Gave me to some aunt I never met, but she shipped me off quick. Been in homes ever since, places where the walls are thin and the rules are thicker. Last one was in Redstone, about 50 miles east. The foster dad, he had this box of old newspapers in the attic. I snuck up there one night, bored and scared after a storm knocked the power out. The boy's fingers drummed the counter, mimicking the rain he'd described. Found clippings about her, not just disappearance, whispers of arguments with some big-shot developer who wanted the land her diner sat on. And then a photo like yours, tucked in the margins. I asked the adults about it, casual-like, but their faces went hard. Heard 'em later in the kitchen, boys asking too many questions. Better keep him quiet before he stirs up old ghosts. The words landed like a kickstand on loose gravel, unsteadying Switch. He pushed off the counter, pacing the shop's length, his boots thudding softly against the oil-stained floor. The air carried the faint scent of cooling metal from the day's last job, mingling with the boy's fear sweat. Naomi hadn't just vanished. She'd been erased. Her story sanded down by folks who preferred clean narratives over messy truths. Switch stopped by the photo, tracing the frame with a thumb blackened by engine grime. Tommy's dying breath replayed in his head. Find her, Switch. She's family. Family. The word twisted like a throttle, pulling him toward the edge. You got proof? Anything besides the clippings? Switch turned, his eyes locking on Eli's. The boy nodded, fishing a crumpled paper from his pocket, yellowed newsprint, edges frayed like nerves. He unfolded it carefully, revealing a grainy image of Naomi outside the diner, arms crossed, facing off against a suited man whose face blurred into anonymity. This, and the name they whispered, Corbin Mills. Said he owned half the county, made problems disappear like dust in the wind. Switch took the clipping, holding it to the light. The date was faded, but pre-2025, a relic from when promises still meant something. Corbin Mills, vaguely familiar, a name tossed around in iron promise meetings as the kind of shadow they rode against. Developers who bulldozed more than land, leaving lives in the rubble. Switch's mind raced, gears shifting from shock to strategy. He couldn't do this alone. The shop was his sanctuary, not a fortress. Hawk Daniels would know what to do. The old man had built the club on stands like this, quiet interventions that toppled giants without a single shot fired. Stay put, kid, Switch said, pulling his phone from his vest pocket. The screen glowed blue in the dimness, illuminating the lines etched deep around his eyes. He stepped into the back office, the door creaking shut behind him, and dialed the number etched into his soul. 3 rings, then a voice like rumbled thunder. Switch, been a while. What's dragging you out of that grease pit? Hawk, it's bad, real bad. Switch kept his voice steady, glancing through the glass at Eli, who sat tracing patterns in the soda's rings. He recounted it all, the boy, the photo, the whispers of silencing. Hawk listened without interruption, the pause at the end heavy as a full tank. Promise you made to Tommy? This is it coming home. Bring the kid to the clubhouse at dawn. We'll loop in Lena, she's our social worker contact, owes the club for pulling her brother out of a jam last year. And Jax, the PI, he can dig without leaving tracks. Relief washed over Switch like cool rain on hot asphalt, but it carried an undercurrent of dread. Dawn meant exposure, meant the suits from earlier might circle back with warrants instead of questions. He hung up, pocketing the phone, and returned to Eli. We're not staying here tonight. Got a safe spot with friends who look out for their own. The boy looked up, uncertainty flickering, but then nodded, a spark of trust igniting in his gaze. As they gathered Eli's few belongings, a backpack stuffed with pilfered snacks and the precious clipping, headlights swept the lot outside, slow and probing. Switch tensed, peering through the blinds, not the law this time, a black sedan, idling like a predator. Corbin's people, or just paranoia playing tricks. He hustled Eli toward the back exit, the desert's chill nipping at their heels as they slipped into the shadows. The bike waited under a tarp, its chrome glinting faintly under the moon. Switch fired it up, the engine's roar a defiant growl against the night. They rode out, the wind whipping past like forgotten regrets. Eli's arms clamped tight around Switch's waist. The road unspooled ahead, straight and unforgiving, leading toward the Iron Promise compound on the outskirts. There, amid the circle of Harleys and the glow of a bonfire pit, waited the family Switch had chosen, the ones who'd stand when blood ties failed. The promise to Tommy wasn't buried anymore. It roared to life with every mile, pulling them into the fray. Redemption wasn't a destination. It was this ride, shared in silence toward whatever truth the dawn would uncover. But as the sedan's lights faded in the rear view, Switch felt the weight of eyes on their backs. The game had begun, and honor demanded they play to win, not with rage, but with the unyielding truth of a kept word. And now, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact hour you heard this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel and at what moments they reach you. The first hints of dawn bled across the horizon like spilled oil on blacktop, turning the desert from ink to bruised purple. Switch throttled down as the Iron Promise compound came into view, a sprawling yard ringed by chain link and weathered trailers, where Harleys stood in neat rows like silent sentinels. The air hummed with the low growl of his engine fading to a purr, then silence broken only by the crunch of gravel under tires. Eli clung tighter behind him, his small frame rigid against the chill that seeped through their jackets. Switch killed the ignition, the sudden quiet amplifying the boys' shallow breaths. Headlights from the pursuing sedan had vanished miles back, swallowed by the night, but the echo of their pursuit lingered like exhaust fumes. Hawk Daniels waited at the gate, his silhouette broad and unbowed at 72, arms crossed over a faded club tee that strained against his chest. Silver hair caught the paling light, and his eyes, sharp as a torque wrench, scanned them both as Switch dismounted. "Brought the storm with you, brother," Hawk rumbled, clapping Switch on the shoulder with a grip that spoke of battles shared and scars earned. No questions yet. Hawk's way was to assess first, act second. He nodded to Eli, softening just enough to offer a gloved hand. "Kid, you look like you've ridden through hell. Come on in. Coffee's hot, and no one's asking for stories till you're ready." Eli hesitated, sliding off the bike with legs that wobbled like overtaxed shocks. Switch watched him, the boy's eyes darting to the compound's heart, a central fire pit ringed by logs, where embers from last night's gathering glowed faintly. The place smelled of pine smoke and motor oil, a far cry from the sterile foster homes Eli had described. "This is Hawk," Switch said, his voice steadying the air between them. "He's the one who keeps the promise in Iron Promise, means something here." Eli took Hawk's hand, the connection brief but solid, like a handshake sealing an unspoken pact. They moved inside the main clubhouse, a low-slung building with walls lined in club memorabilia, faded banners, a wall of honor etched with names of brothers gone, but not forgotten. The door creaked open to warmth, the scent of brewing coffee mingling with leather and faint cigar smoke. Lena Ruiz sat at the scarred oak table, her notebook open, a steaming mug cradled in hands that had steadied too many lost souls. Mid-40s, with a no-nonsense braid and eyes that missed nothing, she rose to greet them. "Gabriel," she said, using Switch's real name like an anchor. "Hawk filled me in on the ride over. Eli, right? I'm Lena. Work with kids like you, the ones the system forgets." Her smile was measured, not pitying, as she slid a chair out for him. Switch pulled up beside Eli, the weight of the night pressing on his shoulders. The clipping from Eli's pocket lay on the table now, unfolded under the harsh fluorescence, Naomi's image staring up like a challenge. "This is what we're dealing with," Switch said, his finger tracing the faded print. "Boy shows up in my shop, IDs her from the wall. Says he's been shuffled under aliases, heard talk of silencing him over old dirt." Hawk leaned in, his shadow falling across the paper, while Lena jotted notes with quick, precise strokes. Eli shifted, the chair creaking under him. "It's not just the photo. In Redstone they had files, locked, but I saw the labels. Heart case, closed. And that name, Corbin Mills. Mom argued with him once, outside the diner. I remember the yelling, how the windows shook. He wanted the place for some mall or whatever, but she wouldn't budge." His voice gained strength, fueled by the room's quiet acceptance, the way no one interrupted or dismissed. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling a loose shutter like impatient fingers. Hawk's face hardened, lines deepening like cracks in sun-baked clay. Mills. Yeah, we've crossed paths with his kind, land grabbers who bury more than foundations. Iron Promise don't ride into wars blind, but we don't let ghosts haunt the living either. He glanced at Switch, the look passing between them heavy with shared history. Tommy's name hung unspoken, but Hawk knew he'd been there that rainy night, pulling Switch from the mud after the loss. "You honoring that old word to Tommy? This is how, quiet, clean." Lena nodded, closing her notebook with a soft snap. "First things, Eli needs stability, not more bouncing. I can pull strings, temporary guardianship under club oversight, frame it as family placement. No red flags for the suits." She met Eli's gaze directly. "You've been brave running like that, but now we build walls around you, safe ones." The boy nodded, a flicker of relief softening his features, though doubt lingered in the set of his jaw. Switch felt it then, the stir of purpose uncoiling in his chest, rusty but real. 20 years of fixing engines, patching lives on the margins, and now this, a chance to mend what he'd let fracture. But as Jax Harlan slipped in through the back door, tall, wiry, with a PI's perpetual squint and a notebook of his own, the tension ratcheted. Jax had owed Hawk since pulling a favor in some long-ago border run, his skills honed in shadows where law couldn't reach. "Heard the rundown," Jax said, voice low as he scanned the clipping. "Mills is slippery, owns shell companies, ties to county brass. I'll start with public records, old diner permits. Dig for liens, complaints. If Naomi crossed him, there'll be paper trails buried under bureaucracy." The group huddled closer, the table becoming a war room of whispers and plans. Switch outlined the social services visit to his shop, the probing sedan that followed. "They're watching," he said, the words tasting like grit. Jax's eyes narrowed. "Expected. I'll tail back, see if they bite. You three stay put. Compound's got eyes." Eli listened, absorbing it all, his small hand inching toward Switch's arm, as if testing the solidity of this new anchor. Dawn broke fully now, sunlight slanting through grimy windows, gilding the eagle patch on Switch's vest. The promise to Tommy wasn't a chain anymore. It was fuel, propelling them forward. But as Jax headed out, engine coughing to life in the yard, Switch caught Eli's eye. "Scared?" he asked quietly. The boy shrugged, but honesty won out. "A little. What if they take me back?" Switch placed a hand on his shoulder, the gesture rough but steady. "They won't. Not while I've got breath. Family's what you fight for, kid, not what they hand you." Eli's nod was tentative, but the spark in his eyes grew, mirroring the fire kindling in Switch's soul. Outside, the desert woke with a chorus of birds and distant traffic, the world turning oblivious to the quiet revolution brewing. Iron Promise moved like this, not with thunder, but with the unbreaking line of loyalty. Mills and his shadows loomed, but for the first time, Switch saw a path through the dust. Truth as the blade, honor as the shield. The ride had only just begun, and redemption rode shotgun, urging them on. The midday sun beat down on the Iron Promise compound like a hammer on an anvil, turning the gravel yard into a shimmering haze of heat. Dust motes danced in the air, kicked up by the occasional boot, or the low rumble of a generator humming behind the clubhouse. Inside, the air was cooler, laced with the rich aroma of fresh brewed coffee and the faint, earthy tang of sage from a bundle burning in the corner, a ritual Hawk insisted on for clarity and tough talks. Switch sat at the oak table, his fingers drumming a slow rhythm on the scarred surface, eyes fixed on the clipping that now lay under a makeshift paperweight, an old spark plug. Eli dozed in a nearby bunk room, exhaustion finally claiming him after the night's ride, his soft snores filtering through the thin walls like a fragile truce with the world. Hawk paced the length of the room, his boots scuffing the worn linoleum, each step deliberate as a heartbeat. "Jax'll turn up dirt by evening," he said, stopping to pour himself another mug, steam curling up like unspoken worries. "But we can't wait on shadows. Lena's got the guardianship papers drafting, clean, no loose ends. Makes you his temporary kin Switch, legal, but under the radar." The words hung there, testing the air. Switch nodded, but his mind churned like an idling engine, the promise to Tommy twisting tighter with every passing hour. Kin, the idea settled uneasy in his gut. He'd fixed bikes, not broken lives, but Eli's arrival had cracked open doors he'd welded shut long ago. Lena returned from her call, slipping her phone into her pocket with a nod that carried quiet authority. "County clerk's office is dragging feet on the old diner records. Surprise, surprise. But I pulled a favor from a contact in records. Naomi filed a complaint against Mills 2 weeks before she vanished. Harassment, threats to her business. It got buried fast, marked unsubstantiated." She slid a fresh printout across the table, the paper crisp and official, stamped with a generic seal from the fictional Brimstone Protective Agency. Switch scanned it, the words blurring into the familiar ache of injustice, a woman standing her ground, only to be ground down by men in suits who wrote the rules. "Threats," Switch muttered, his voice rough as sandpaper on rust. "And no one followed up, just let it fade like exhaust." Hawk placed a hand on his shoulder, the gesture steadying, like a brother bracing for the turn. "That's how they work. Slow poison, not a crash. But we're not them. Iron Promise rides straight." The room fell quiet, save for the tick of a wall clock, marking time like miles on an odometer. Switch felt the weight of it all, the photo in his shop, now tucked safely in a lockbox. Eli's trust, fragile as new chrome, and the ghosts of what-ifs that had haunted his nights for 2 decades. Outside, the gate rattled. A vehicle approaching, tires crunching gravel with purposeful slowness. Switch tensed, rising to peer through the blinds. Not Jax's unmarked truck, but a county cruiser, its lights off but presence heavy as a storm cloud. 2 officers stepped out, badges catching the sun like warnings, flanked by a woman in a crisp blazer. Social services, the real kind, not Lena's ally. Hawk cursed under his breath, low and controlled. They move fast when names get whispered. "Stay cool, brother." No raised voices. The door swung open without a knock, the officers filling the frame like unwelcome shadows. The lead one, a stocky man with a mustache that hid his scowl, scanned the room. "Gabriel Hayes? We're here for the Heart Boy. Reports of a runaway in your area, last seen near your shop. Hand him over and we avoid complications." His partner hovered by the door, hand resting near his belt, the air thickening with the scent of authority's starch and sweat. Lena stepped forward, her posture unyielding, notebook in hand like a shield. "Officers, I'm Lena Ruiz, licensed advocate. Eli's under temporary protective placement here, per protocol. Paperwork's en route. Check with your dispatch. The blazer woman, Ms. Harlan, her tag read, pushed past, eyes narrowing at the table's scattered documents. This isn't a hotel for strays, Ms. Ruiz. The boy's got a history, disruptive, questions that stir trouble. We've got orders to relocate him to a secure facility. Mills Foundation sponsors it. Clean, no drama. The name dropped like a wrench on toes, casual but pointed. Switch's blood heated, but he held back, fists clenched at his sides. Mills, already circling, using the system's own chains to pull Eli away before truths surfaced. Hawk moved then, his voice even as desert wind. Secure facility, sounds like a cage with a view. Boy's safe here, with family. You got a warrant, or just fishing? The officer's mustache twitched, irritation flashing. We're not asking, Daniels. Iron Promise has a rep for meddling. Step aside, or we'll escalate. Tension coiled in the room, thick as oil smoke, every breath measured. Switch glanced toward the bunkroom door, where Eli's form stirred faintly. Had he heard? The promise burned hotter now, not just to Tommy, but to this kid who'd crashed into his world, like a lifeline thrown across years. Lena intervened smoothly, flipping open her notebook. Escalate how? I've got jurisdiction logs showing compliance. Harassing a minor's placement without cause, that's a fast track to oversight review. She met Harlan's gaze, unblinking, the standoff stretching like a taut chain. The officers exchanged looks, the blazer's phone buzzing in her pocket. A retreat signal, perhaps. This isn't over, the lead growled, backing toward the door. We'll be back with the judge's sign-off. Keep the boy put. They filed out, the cruiser kicking up dust as it peeled away, leaving the compound in uneasy silence. Switch exhaled, sinking into a chair, the adrenaline fading to a hollow thrum. Hawk locked the door, his face grim. They're testing us, seeing if we'll crack. Mills knows we're sniffing. Lena gathered her papers, her calm a anchor. Gives us time. Jack should have prelims soon. We build the case quiet. Affidavits from old diner staff, cross-check complaints. Truth's our leverage, not force. Switch nodded, but doubt gnawed. How long before they came harder, with cuffs instead of questions? Eli emerged then, rubbing sleep from his eyes, drawn by the voices. They gone? He asked, voice small but steady. Switch pulled him close, the boy's head fitting against his side like a missing piece. For now, but we're not running, we're standing. The words sealed it, a vow renewed in the light of midday. Outside, the sun climbed higher, baking the earth, but inside, resolve hardened like tempered steel. Redemption wasn't handed out. It was forged in these moments, loyalty the fire that tempered it true. As the afternoon wore on, Jax's call came, a gravelly update on a burner line. Found a witness, old cook from the diner, says Naomi got a late-night visit from Mills's crew, rough talk about vacating or vanishing. No bruises, but fear in her eyes after. Switch gripped the phone, the pieces aligning like a rebuilt frame. The shadows were lengthening, but so was their line, family chosen, promises unbroken. The fight for justice simmered, ethical and unrelenting, pulling them deeper into the fray. If this chapter moved you, hit that like button and share the ride. Your support keeps these stories roaring on. Word count, 872. The late afternoon sun slanted through the clubhouse windows like golden blades, carving sharp angles across the oak table, where maps and printouts lay scattered like battlefield debris. The air inside carried the sharp bite of cooling coffee and the faint, acrid whiff of Jax's cigarette smoke lingering from his hurried exit. Switch stood by the window, arms crossed, his silhouette etched against the glare as he watched the gravel yard for any sign of return. The cruiser's dust trail long settled, but the threat it carried still churning in his veins. Eli sat nearby, sketching absent-mindedly on a napkin with a borrowed pencil. his lines jagged like the doubts etching his young face. Hawk and Lena huddled over a laptop, their murmurs a low counterpoint to the distant hum of a chainsaw from the compound's edge, where brothers cleared brush for a new perimeter fence. Jax's voice had crackled through the phone like static over a bad connection, but the words stuck. The old cook, Manny Ruiz, no relation to Lena, just a coincidence that felt like fate's wry nod, had seen Naomi's last stand. "He'll talk, but not here," Jax had said. "Manny's holed up in a trailer park off Route 12, scared spitless of Mill's Reach. Meet at dusk, neutral ground, a roadside diner that ain't his old haunt." Switch had agreed without hesitation, the promise to Tommy thrumming like an unbalanced wheel, urging him forward. Now, as shadows lengthened, the decision weighed heavier. Taking Eli out there meant risk, eyes everywhere, whispers turning to actions, but leaving the boy behind felt like breaking the fragile trust they'd built. "You sure about this?" Hawk asked, closing the laptop with a decisive click. His eyes, weathered by decades of hard calls, met Switch's without judgment, just the quiet probe of a man who'd ridden through worse. "Compound secure, but the road. Mills's crew don't play subtle forever." Switch nodded, glancing at Eli, who paused his sketching, pencil hovering. The boy's gaze held a mix of fear and fire, the same quiet defiance Naomi must have worn when she faced down the developer. "Can't dig truth from a hole," Switch replied, his voice steady as forged iron. "Manny's our first real thread. We pull it gentle, see what unravels." Lena rose, slipping her jacket on, the fabric whispering against her braid. "I'll ride shotgun. Got questions only a social eye can ask. Gaps in the records, kids' placements tied to Mill's donations. Keeps it clean." Eli set the napkin down, a rough sketch of a diner emerging from the folds, neon sign flickering, windows steamed. "I want to go," he said, chin lifting, voice threading determination through the tremor. Switch knelt to his level, the floorboards creaking under his weight, close enough to catch the faint scent of soap from the bunkroom shower. "Too hot out there yet, kid. You stay with Hawk. Help him check the bikes. Learn the ropes." Eli's eyes searched his, testing for lies, but found none. A small nod, then a reluctant, "Okay, but tell me everything after." The exchange sealed something unspoken, a bond forging in the quiet spaces between words, family chosen not by blood, but by the stand taken. They rolled out as the sun dipped toward the jagged horizon, Switch's Harley leading Lena's unmarked sedan in a loose convoy. The engine's rumble vibrated through Switch's bones, the wind whipping past with the dry rasp of sagebrush and the metallic tang of heated chrome. Route 12 unspooled like a forgotten vein, potholes jolting memories loose. Tommy's laugh on similar rides, Naomi's photo tucked in a saddlebag during those early searches that yielded nothing but dust. The diner loomed ahead, a squat relic with peeling paint and a sign buzzing "Eclipse Eats" in faded red. Jax waited in the lot, leaning against his truck, a toothpick rolling between his teeth as he scanned the empty spaces. No tails, he'd signaled with a nod, no black sedans, no cruisers lurking in the heat haze. Inside, the place smelled of sizzling grease and stale pie crust. Booths cracked like old leather. Manny sat in the back corner, a wiry man in his 60s with hands gnarled from years flipping burgers, nursing a coffee that had gone cold. His eyes darted as they approached, but Jax's quiet introduction eased the tension. "These are the good ones, Manny. No badges, no strings." Switch slid into the booth opposite, Lena beside him, her notebook discreet on her lap. The cook's gaze flicked to Switch's vest, the iron promise eagle, a talisman that brought trust in these parts. "Heard you knew Naomi," Switch started, voice low over the diner's hum of an ancient fan. "What did you see that night?" Manny leaned in, breath ragged, fingers tracing the mug's rim like a rosary. "Week before she vanished, late after close, diner empty but for us cleaning up, black SUVs rolled in, 3 of them, lights off like ghosts. Mill's boys, big fellas, suits too tight for the desert. They cornered her by the register, voices low but sharp. "Sign the lease or walk away, lady. Town's changing." She stood her ground, arms crossed like she was holding the whole place up. Told him the diner's hers, paid for fare, ain't selling to no chain that'd pave over memories. He paused, eyes distant, the memory pulling at him like a hook. One grabbed her arm, not hard, but enough to leave marks. She yanked free, said she'd fight it legal. They laughed, said papers disappear like people who push too hard, left her shaking but unbroken. Next day, she was humming again, braiding that boy's hair in the booth. Then, gone. Lena's pen scratched softly, capturing fragments without interrupting. "Any names? Witnesses besides you?" Manny shook his head, but pulled a folded receipt from his pocket, yellowed, dated just before Naomi's disappearance. She wrote it down after they left. "Tell someone if I don't make it home." Slipped it to me with a tip, kept it hidden, scared it'd vanish too. Switch took it, the paper fragile as a whisper, Naomi's script looping in faded ink. Corbin Mills, threats. Protect Eli. The words hit like a backfire, igniting the promise anew. Mills hadn't just wanted land, he'd wanted silence, erasing Naomi to claim it all, shuffling her son through shadows to bury the questions. Outside, twilight deepened, the sky bruising to indigo as they stepped into the cooling air. Jax pocketed the receipt for safekeeping. "This ties it. Harassment to the vanishing. I'll cross-reference with the complaint Lena pulled, Mills's foundation. Funds half the foster system here, leverage to keep mouths shut." Switch mounted his bike, the engine coughing to life with a throaty roar that scattered the gathering dusk. But as they pulled onto the road, headlights flared in the rear view, a single vehicle, accelerating fast. No plates visible in the gloom. Not coincidence. Pursuit, closing the gap like a noose tightening. Switch gunned it, Lena's sedan keeping pace, the desert blurring into streaks of shadow and starlight. Eli waited back at the compound, safe for now. But the truth they'd unearthed burned hotter, drawing enemies closer. Redemption demanded this chase, not fleeing, but facing the dark with the light of a kept word. The road twisted ahead, unforgiving, but Switch rode steady, loyalty his compass, honor the fuel that wouldn't run dry. Mills's web was fraying, one thread at a time, and the unraveling had only begun. The night road uncoiled like a serpent under the bike's headlight, stars wheeling overhead in a vast, indifferent canopy. Switch leaned into the curve, the Harley's frame vibrating through his gloves as he pushed the throttle, wind howling past with the sharp sting of chilled desert air laced with sage and exhaust. Behind him, Lena's sedan held steady in the side mirror, its beams cutting the dark like hesitant allies. The pursuing vehicle, a sleek black SUV now unmistakable in the rear view, gained ground, its engine a predatory snarl that drowned the night's subtle chorus of crickets and rustling brush. No sirens, no flashes. This was shadow work, Mills's hand reaching without the cover of law. Switch's mind raced faster than the tires, fragments of Manny's words replaying like a looped reel. Naomi's script on that receipt, protect Eli. The boy was miles back, tucked safe in the compound, under Hawk's watchful eye, but the thought of him twisted Switch's gut like a seized bolt. This chase wasn't random. Jax's truck had peeled off earlier toward a back route, drawing no heat, but their path from the diner screamed exposure. The receipt burned in Switch's pocket, a talisman of truth that demanded safeguarding. He signaled Lena with a gloved fist, branch left at the upcoming fork, toward the old quarry pits where the road pitted into forgotten gravel veins. If they could lose the tail there, in the maze of rusted machinery and shadowed craters, they'd buy time to regroup. The fork came sharp, gravel spitting under the tires as Switch veered, the bike fishtailing briefly before settling. Lena followed, her headlights sweeping the turn like a sweep search. The SUV hesitated, then barreled after, its bulk less agile on the uneven terrain. Switch downshifted, the engine's growl deepening to a throaty warning, dust clouds billowing in their wake like smoke signals of defiance. The quarry loomed ahead, a skeletal relic of boomtown days, towering conveyor belts frozen in rust, pits yawning black under the moon's pale gaze. He killed the headlight for a beat, plunging into shadow, then flicked it back as he wove between derelict hoppers, the air thick with the metallic reek of oxidized iron and damp earth. Lena's sedan braked hard behind a collapsed silo, its engine idling low as she radioed through the open window. "Switch, they're splitting, one circling wide. We can't outrun forever." Her voice cut clear over the static, steady, but edged with the same resolve that had faced down the county suits earlier. Switch circled back, pulling alongside, the bike's heat radiating against his leg like a fevered pulse. "We don't run, we stand." He glanced at the SUV's distant lights, probing the perimeter, then nodded toward the central pit. "Hide the evidence here, then double back to the compound. Hawk's got the line open. Tell him to ready the brothers. Quiet muster. No guns, just presence." She passed him the burner phone, her eyes reflecting the dashboard glow. Fierce, unyielding, the mark of someone who'd chosen this family over the system's cold machinery. "Manny's receipt's gold, but it's bait too. Mills wants it gone, like her." Switch tucked it deeper, the paper crinkling against his chest, Naomi's words a silent vow, sinking with Tommy's last breath. The promise wasn't just survival now, it was amplification, pulling in the iron promise web to shield what corruption sought to crush. He revved once, a salute, then gunned toward the shadows, leaving Lena to slip away unseen. The SUV closed in as Switch emerged from the pit's edge, its grille looming like a predator's maw. He twisted the throttle, aiming for the access road's narrow bridge, a rickety span over a dry wash, planks groaning under weight. The pursuer surged, but the bridge buckled under its mass, tires screeching as it fishtailed, nosing into the rail with a metallic screech that echoed like a confession torn free. Switch didn't look back, the road straightening into the night's embrace, his heart pounding a rhythm of narrow escapes. Miles blurred, the compound's faint lights winking on the horizon like beacons of chosen kin. Dawn's first blush painted the sky in muted pinks as Switch rolled through the gate, gravel crunching under tires slick with quarry dust. Hawk met him at the clubhouse door, Eli peering from behind, eyes wide but steady. "Lost 'em?" Hawk asked, voice gravel low, clapping Switch's shoulder as he dismounted. Switch nodded, pulling the receipt free, its edges frayed but intact. For now, Lena's en route, brought more than words. Eli stepped forward, small hand outstretched, and Switch placed the paper in it gently, the boy's fingers tracing Naomi's script like braille of the lost. "She fought," Eli whispered, voice cracking on the edge of wonder. "Like you." The clubhouse stirred with quiet activity, brothers emerging from trailers, vests donned. No clamor but a unified hum like an engine warming. Lena arrived minutes later, sliding from her sedan with a folder of fresh pulls, cross-reference donations from Mills Foundation to foster oversight. Placements that funneled kids like Eli into silence. "It's a net," she said, spreading the documents on the table, the morning light slanting across them like judgment's ray. "He funds the system to control it, bury cases, move witnesses. Naomi's complaint, it threatened his mall project, the land grab that swallowed the diner site." Hawk traced a line on the map, his finger steady. "We expose it clean. Affidavits from Manny, the cook's kin if we find 'em. Lawyers on standby, the one who cleaned our last run-in with county brass." Switch watched Eli absorb it all, the boy's sketch from yesterday now pinned to the wall beside Naomi's photo. A crude diner standing defiant, The chase had stripped away illusions. This was no lone ride, but a convoy, loyalty weaving them tighter against the fraying edges of corruption. Tommy's ghost felt closer, not haunting but guiding, the promise evolving from buried oath to living shield. But as Jax's truck rumbled in, kicking up dawn dust, his face etched with fresh urgency, Switch sensed the web tightening back. Mills called a meet. Neutral ground tomorrow noon. Says he'll discuss the boy. Trap or truce? The air thickened, coffee steam mingling with the scent of resolve. Switch met Hawk's gaze, then Eli's, the weight shared now, not solitary. We go, not to fight, but to lay truth bare. Honor demands it. Eli nodded. A spark of his mother's fire kindling brighter. The desert morning unfolded, vast and unyielding. But in the clubhouse's heart, redemption took root, silent, ethical, a force that outlasted shadows. Mills's game teetered, and with every thread pulled, justice edged closer, not through fury, but the unbreakable line of a word kept true. The final stand loomed, family at its core, pulling them into the light. The noon sun blazed over the neutral ground, a weathered picnic area off Route 47, where scrub oak clawed at the cracked earth, and the distant hum of semis carried like a faint dirge. Tables scarred by years of carved initials stood empty, save for one where Corbin Mills waited, his tailored suit a stark contrast to the dust settling on his polished shoes. Flanked by two stone-faced associates, he sipped from a thermos, eyes hidden behind mirrored shades that reflected the approaching convoy like a predator sizing up prey. Switch throttled down his Harley at the lot's edge, the engine's rumble fading to a whisper as Hawk and Jax pulled in beside him, their bikes forming a quiet phalanx. Lena's sedan idled last. Eli tucked safe in the back with a trusted brother, out of sight but close enough to feel the pulse of the stand. Switch dismounted first, boots hitting gravel with a crunch that echoed his resolve, the iron promise patch on his vest catching the light like a badge of unyielding truth. No weapons, no bluster, just the weight of gathered evidence in a plain folder under his arm, Manny's receipt, Lena's cross-referenced donations, affidavits from two former diner patrons who'd overheard Mills's threats years back. The air shimmered with heat, carrying the dry scent of creosote and tension as Switch approached the table alone, Hawk's nod a silent anchor from the bikes. Mills removed his shades, revealing eyes sharp as a faulty weld, appraising Switch with the casual disdain of a man used to buying silence. "Hayes," Mills drawled, voice smooth as oiled gears. "Didn't peg you for the family man type. Word is you've got something that belongs back in the ground. Old pictures, older stories. The boys stirred enough dust. Hand it over, and we call it even. Foster Systems got a spot for him, quiet and funded." His associates shifted, hands loose but ready, the implication hanging like exhaust. Comply or the shadows lengthen. Switch set the folder down, not slamming but placing it deliberate, the papers fanning slightly in the breeze. "Not here to bargain, Mills. We're here for the light on what you buried. Naomi Hart didn't vanish voluntary. She crossed you, stood against your land grab, and you made sure she paid. Threats shuffling her son through your funded cages to keep questions quiet. We've got the threads, complaints, witnesses, your foundation's strings pulling county levers." Mills's smile thinned, a crack in the facade, as he glanced at the folder without touching it. The sun beat down, sweat beading on his brow, the desert's indifference amplifying the moment's gravity. Paranoia from biker folklore. Police closed the case. Woman walked away from a dead-end life. You're meddling in grown-up business, risking the kid's future for ghosts. But his voice wavered, the first fracture, as Jack stepped forward from the bikes, his wiry frame unassuming but eyes holding the PI's quiet steel. Grown-up business like vanishing complaints? Or funding placements to silence runaways? We've traced it. Manny Ruiz saw your crew that night, the arm grab, the warnings. And this. Jax slid a photo printout across, grainy but clear. Mills outside the diner, gesturing sharply at Naomi, time-stamped weeks before her disappearance. The associates tensed, one reaching for a phone, but Hawk's presence loomed at the perimeter, brothers forming a loose circle. Not aggressive, but a wall of leather and loyalty that spoke volumes. Lena emerged from the sedan then, Eli at her side now, the boy's small hand in hers, his chin lifted with the fire Switch had seen flicker to life. "This is about family, Mr. Mills," Lena said, her tone even, professional steel wrapped in compassion. "Not yours, the one Naomi built, the one we're honoring. Eli's not going back to your net. Oversight's waiting on these docks. One call, and your foundation's audits start unraveling." Eli met Mills' gaze, unflinching, his voice steady, despite the tremor beneath. "She didn't leave me. You took her story away. I want it back." Mills leaned back, the thermos forgotten, his composure splintering like dry timber under pressure. The wind picked up, scattering grit across the table, carrying the faint echo of a far-off engine. Reinforcements? Or just the world's indifferent churn? He exhaled, long and calculated, eyes flicking to his men, who stood frozen in the standoff's hush. "You think truth scares me? I've built empires on harder ground." But the words rang hollow, the folder's contents a mirror reflecting the rot beneath. Switch leaned in, voice low as an idling motor. "Empires fall when the foundation's exposed. Tommy made me promise to find her, for family. Iron promise stands on words like that. Yours? They crumble." The silence stretched, taut as a guy wire, until Mills rose slowly, signaling his associates with a curt nod. "Keep your papers. But this ends quiet. No headlines, no drags through courts that'll orphan the boy for good." It wasn't surrender, not fully, but a retreat, the first concession in a war fought with ethics over fists. He turned toward his SUV, the group dispersing like shadows at midday, leaving the folder untouched, a gauntlet thrown and not picked up. Switch watched them go, the vehicle's taillights fading into the heat haze, the knot in his chest loosening just enough to breathe. Back at the compound, as the sun arced toward evening, the pieces settled into place. Lena's calls bore fruit. The Brimstone Protective Agency reopened Naomi's case as involuntary with prejudice, audits hitting Mills' foundation like precision strikes, forcing disclosures that peeled back layers of influence. No arrests yet, Mills' web too tangled for swift justice. But the pressure mounted, ethical and unrelenting, witnesses emerging from the woodwork like roots breaking stone. Eli stood by the fire pit that night, flames dancing in his eyes as Switch recounted the meat, the boy's sketch of the diner now framed beside Naomi's photo, a testament to memory reclaimed. Switch felt the promise fulfilled then, not in thunder, but in the quiet roar of engines idling around the pit, brothers sharing nods and stories under the star-pricked sky. Tommy's ghost lingered no longer as a burden, but as a spark passed on. Redemption woven into the club's chain, linking past to present. Eli's hand found his, small but sure, the family chosen expanding like the desert horizon. Justice wasn't a gavel's bang. It was this, the moral stand that outlasted corruption, honor the legacy etched in scars and silence. The air cooled, sage smoke curling upward, as Hawk raised a mug in toast. "To kept words," he rumbled, and the circle echoed it, voices blending into the night's embrace. Switch met Eli's gaze, seeing Naomi's smile reflected back, not lost, but found. The ride had circled full, pulling them from shadows into light, where promises endured, unbreakable as the road ahead. Thank you for riding this journey with us. If these tales of honor and redemption resonate, hit subscribe and join the Iron Promise family for more stories that honor the heart. Your support keeps the engine running.